Welcome to Satisfied, a monthly program on the Generation podcast designed to offer practical tools based on biblical principles so that anyone can experience full purity and lead others to do the same. Hello and welcome back to the Satisfied podcast here on the Generation Network. This is Ryan and I'm here again with my wife Stephanie just a few days before Christmas. And although this is not necessarily a Christmas-themed podcast, we are inside cozying up by our Christmas tree here with lights all around. Sadly, no fire crackling for you in the background this time, although we could do that in post if we wanted to. But it's about 45 degrees out, and I was just pushing it a little bit too much. You Wisconsinites and those living up north, you'd probably say that's nothing, and you'd be out no problem and out in short sleeves. But yeah, that would have been us a few years ago. But moving south has a way of making you a wimp in the cold really quickly. So yeah, this is indoor weather for us. No fire crackling, sorry. But we're going to get through the last few questions here and wrap this up so that our first podcast in the new year will be starting the series on our thought life. And we're excited about that. But we've got a few more questions from our Q&A. Again, this is part 3 of the Q&A with questions that were taken during our live podcast at the Generation Youth Summit this year. So if you haven't listened to the first 2, make sure you do that. But this is part 3 of 3, and I'm quite sure we'll be able to finish these. So Steph has gone through and has these a few questions ready to finish out. And again, she's seen them. I haven't seen them yet just because we want to keep it fresh for you. And we'll see what we got here. So, Steph, what do we have?
Okay. What advice do you give to someone going to a public school and is constantly faced with immoral language, phrases, and implied signals from other students? Do I just walk away? How do I represent Christ while protecting my mental purity?
All right, well, several things coming to mind. First would just be, of course, that is a very difficult place to be. And I understand that a school choice isn't always up to the child. So, you as a student may wish you had the opportunity to be in a safer position that was a bit more sheltered, shall we say, in a good way. But that I understand that may not be possible. There may not be a good Christian school, or homeschooling might not be a possibility. So that may be all you have. But if there was an opportunity to get out of such a increasingly hostile environment, then that would be choice number 1. It's just, especially if you struggle morally in any way already, that's going to be a very intense battleground to be around peers that much that are going to be, you're going to be infiltrated with the temptations for sure. But that being said, if that is what you have and that's where you're at, we need to remember that although it may feel like no one else is facing the same kind of level of temptation as you are, and this is just an impossible situation, that there is no temptation that hath taken you but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will with the temptation provide that way of escape. And you need to be confident, even in an environment like that God is still faithful, and you will not face a temptation that is more than you can bear with the way of escape that He's providing. So there is a way out. There is a way of victory, 100%, in any environment that you're placed in. So knowing then that, let's just assume that there's no way out of this, there's no Christian school, there's no other option. If there is, that would be plan A. But if not, let's just assume this is what you have. The public school is inevitable for you. If you just try to stay on the defense this whole time and just try to stay innocent by avoiding those people and those conversations, I think it has to be more than that. Because as you would know, probably better than I, being in that situation, it's looking for you. Those conversations, people, especially if they pick up on the fact that you're trying to avoid that, or you're somehow offended by inappropriate jokes or immoral conversations, then you could even become a target for the wrong people to bring those up to you. So instead, going on the offense, you've got to see those people as your mission field, because right now they see you as theirs. And so if you turn that around and just see people as souls, and as we talked a lot about at the Generation Youth Summit, so this person with the question would have been there. We discussed the opportunities that we have to give the gospel in a public school setting. It's huge. So if you see it that way, then and stay on the offense, then it's going to be much harder for the devil to appeal to your selfishness, because you're at school on mission. Now, I think there still is a degree of discretion that needs to be there. There are strange women, there are strange men there that you should not be hanging around. And so they may need Christ, but if being around them is more of a blatant temptation to you and it's unwise, then being on the offense and on mission, maybe protecting yourselves and not putting yourself in a position that you know would lead to compromise. So have discretion, but as you have opportunity, just stay on mission. Just the whole time you're there, be thinking, what I'm doing right now is not about me. I have an opportunity for Christ, and I'm going to use every conversation that I can that direction, as opposed to just trying to run and hope that it never gets to you, because the devil is walking about as a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour, and that's his stomping grounds nowadays. You're right in the middle of it. So you stay on the offense. Yes, walk away from conversations that go south, but beyond that, look for opportunities to start conversations about Christ.
Yeah, I think that's really good. Just being on the offense is huge. I think even just mentally, sometimes that is important. I know, like, probably the closest situation I would have been into, like a public school, would just be working with, unsaved coworkers and kids my own age, sometimes in high school as well. And it's just easy to just kind of take in everything that they're saying, and you kind of view it as normal once you've heard it so many times, whether it's they're using God's name in vain or cursing, or just their perspective on the world. And so something I remember consciously having to do was just fighting back my mind every time I heard something that was false, and either saying scripture or just thinking it through and really thinking truth instead of letting any of that falsehood go in, because it's very easy just to get desensitized and see that all as normal, and then it ends up hurting you, even though it doesn't seem like it's this huge step. It's just been kind of happening as you hear it over and over, and the devil uses that, just the language and everything, to tear you down.
Yeah, so I guess being intentional the whole time you're there, intentional in your actions and in your thoughts, taking every thought captive, especially, if you just view it this way, that either you're the missionary and they're the mission field, or they are the missionary and you are the mission field. It's not a neutral ground. So if you're not taking action and intentionally reaching those people for Christ, reaching your peers and even your professors and teachers, if you're not actively trying to share Christ with them and be an example to them, then just note that they are actively then seeking you out to convert you. And all the lies presented in the public school, the worldview presented in the public school, the immorality presented in the public school, all of those things are given to try to convert you to that worldview. And so you've got to be intentional and actively trying to seek them out. It's a good question.
Yep. Okay, next one. How can I be fully satisfied with Jesus while waiting for marriage?
Steph might have some further thoughts on this. We did a pretty significant discussion on this in 2 different podcasts. The first one was called Quenching the Crave, and the second one was called One Desire. Quenching the Crave, I think, a little bit more focused on being satisfied with Jesus in light of physical and viewing that kind of sexuality. And the One Desire was being satisfied with Jesus which was in light of the emotional battles that we may face, which I think this question might be leaning that direction since it mentioned marriage. But I like the question in that you're not asking if it's possible to be satisfied with Jesus. You're assuming that, and you're just asking how. And of course, it is possible to be satisfied with just Jesus because we are all expected to walk in victory, and single people just as well as married people. So that desire, which is a desire for intimacy, that, as we discussed in the podcast, one desire, the same desire that is leading someone to have inappropriate relations with someone, is that desire for intimacy, for vulnerability on the deepest level. And that same desire, when you define it that way, can be and needs to be met with Jesus even beyond marriage. So this isn't just how do I meet it now before marriage and then how is it different after. It's really the same. Is every one of those desires, like for example, the desire for someone to be loyal, for loyalty within a relationship, the desire to be heard, to be understood within a relationship. Those things are what can drive people a wrong direction into inappropriate relationships. But those very same things need to lead you to Christ, who is the only one who can impeccably be dependable and trustworthy and loyal and can listen and understand and empathize. He's the only one that can do that. So being satisfied with Jesus is actually the most natural and the only way you can truly be satisfied. Now, what that looks like practically, and Steph, you may have other thoughts on this. I remember giving an example in a podcast of a young lady who's actually now married, but at the time was single, and she would intentionally take one segment of time a week, and where she would like to, if she was married, go out on a date with her husband or something like that, or go to a park, and instead she would say, where would I go if I did have a relationship with a man in my life, and instead I'm going to take Jesus there. I'm going to meet with Jesus. She'd go to a restaurant, to a coffee shop, to a park, and just spend time with the Lord there. And so in that way, she was purposefully choosing to be satisfied with Christ as a single young lady. And I hope she still does that, because she still needs to be just as intentional with a relationship with the Lord now, even though she's married. Do you have any more thoughts on that, Steph?
We can be so focused on ourselves and what we want to fulfill us, but turning to Jesus in that relationship and what he wants you to do, even being a blessing to others and just living outside of yourself is a big key to that too.
Yeah, and maybe a good barometer, I heard somebody say, a good barometer of your priority of relationships as a single person is how much of your prayer time is consumed by just praying for someone of the opposite gender. Is that, if you're going to have a meaningful time with the Lord, is it always focused around that person you're praying about? Or do you pray about other things? Do you pray about the opportunities you have to give the gospel? Do you pray about other areas and needs of your life? Are you praying for people, for the benefit of others and interceding for them that have no direct correlation or benefit to you at all? Or are your prayers kind of wrapped up selfishly around this? So having a relationship with Jesus outside of just the hope of a future spouse is very important as well, and could be a good barometer for you. Good. What's next?
For someone having sustained victory, what would be a good tool to continue that victory?
We read a testimony that was at the Generation Youth Summit when we were doing that live podcast, did the Q&A. Right before we started that Q&A that we're finishing now, we read a testimony from a college graduate who very vulnerably, he was very candid with us, and he stated that he had several years of sustained victory, but he got a little bit overconfident in that, and was a bit of an example of the verse, let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. He let his guard down and did not, as this question states, did not have tools in his life to guard himself. And he stated that in the three areas that we had discussed of desire, availability, and isolation, he had let down his guard in at least two of those areas, and so ended up falling even worse, he said, than he had been before, because he just was so convinced he had kicked the issue. So you're asking the right question. And I think, though, it's not overly complicated, because if best we can understand, the recipe that's given for consistent and sustained victory in this way needs to be addressed in all three areas. Your desire, which is your walking with the Lord; the availability, which is not making provision for the flesh, locking down devices, that kind of thing; and then isolation, which is having proper biblical accountability in your life. If it, I don't think it matters where you're at in your purity journey. You need to be sure that you have you are fighting the battle and you have defenses in all three of those areas. So, for example, you're not going to reach a point of sustained victory when you don't need to worry about your relationship with the Lord anymore, so you forget about the desire category, obviously. So then why should we reach a point in our victory where we're forgetting about the availability, and now we're not as concerned about having our devices opened up and not having a filter and that kind of thing? So to answer your question, specific tools in that way, Covenant Eyes is what I use. Accountable to You has been another one that's helpful. Just there's no reason to have that kind of availability where nothing's locked down on your phone or computer. Always have a tool in that area to keep things locked down, no matter how long you've been in sustained victory. It's just not worth having that kind of availability. So then lastly, in the isolation category, I think having some measure of accountability, especially if this is something that you've struggled with in the past. You mentioned you're at a point of sustained victory. That's a bit subjective. That could mean 3 weeks or 3 years or 30 years. But I think everybody needs some type of accountability. So we're answering to someone. Now, you may be in a position where that doesn't look like daily accountability for you. The principle we go off of there is never alone, so that's why I interpret that daily accountability, and that is what we've seen be very helpful for folks. But maybe eventually get to a point where once a week is sufficient. But the way we've designed the Cord app is you can stay accountable each day. And it's normally taken 3, maybe 5 minutes to do that a day. And I think that's sustainable for everyone. And so to me, that's a small price to pay, 3 to 5 minutes of a day, to guard ourselves in that last category of isolation. So keep an internet filter, keep some kind of accountability, and then for sure don't waver in your walk with the Lord as the primary focus there in our victory.
So kind of coming off of that question, you were talking about the Cord app. This person was wondering why you made the Cord app.
Well, it started with a need in my own life. I wanted accountability, and so the scale of 1 to 10 that we are using now in the 3 areas of thoughts, viewing, and self-gratification, I was journaling that scale of 1 to 10 myself, and I wanted a means at which I could communicate that daily with someone. It was based off of the biblical principles from Ecclesiastes chapter 4 of woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him up, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. So I realized I needed someone else to be involved in that. I found out that one of my close friends, was struggling as much as I was, and he wanted the same kind of accountability. So we didn't want to just send a text every day because it just was impersonal and easy to be dishonest in a text. And so we thought phone conversations would be the way to go. We did that for an entire summer. I would make 2 phone calls every day to 2 different guys. And we did that. It worked. It was fine. In some ways it was great. It was very helpful. But it was also impractical and not very sustainable to do that, try to align schedules every day to make that happen. So we moved over to the app Marco Polo, where we were on that for a couple of years, and it was okay, but there were just limitations that it had, and as well as just a secular platform that we really didn't feel right supporting from the pulpit as our ministry was expanded and we're doing more and more purity conferences and discussions on this. So I was actually talking with a video producer, and explained the idea to him of the app, and he just said, Ryan, you have to do this. He was a Christian himself. Actually, he was working on the Renew series and is the producer of the Renew series. So you'll hopefully be seeing some of his work here soon when that's released. But he said, there is nothing like what you just described to me. Is your burden for an accountability app, and you have to make that happen. He set us up with developers in Michigan, Gruder's Productions. They have been an excellent resource and help to us. Gave us a good deal on price-wise on the development. And so that's why and how this was started. It's been an idea for quite a few years, but the catalyst was the Renew series and the producer there saying there's nothing else here that's meeting that need. You've got to do that. So then the Lord provided funds for it, and we just, I guess, passed our 1 year anniversary with about 200, somewhere around 215 users on there.
How do you build your mind stronger? And what are some resources you could buy or order?
I think for this question, because we're leading into the series on this, I think I'm going to just hold off to address that because we're going to dive into this a lot deeper. As far as resources, I need to come up with a structured list of this because I know this is something that would be helpful to have, and so I'm glad somebody's asking that and bringing it to the forefront. I have, and even recently, been looking for a resource that I can unequivocally recommend, but it's hard. There's sometimes really great resources and books. They start out in a way I'm thinking, yes, this is something that I could just totally recommend to anybody on this issue. And then there'll be maybe it's an illustration in there that I feel like is just too provocative and doesn't, just the way it's presented could do more harm than good from somebody reading this. And it might be that, or a perspective that I really don't feel like is biblical and that I couldn't totally support. So that's why it's difficult to just say, here's a list of excellent books on the topic. But I know there are some out there, and I do want to give you resources outside, of course, just listening to our podcast, because there are other great resources for that. So I will continue to work on that and follow up at some point with some recommendations that way. But I appreciate that question and the desire to continue to learn in this area. That's good, and we'll get back to that, as well as the question on the thought life and building up your mind and structuring that properly, the renewing of the mind. We'll be discussing all those things starting next month.
Okay, last one. How would you best build accountability in marriage?
This, in many ways, there's some principles that are going to apply to any marriage, of course, but this definitely is not cut and dry, and a lot of it is going to depend on, let's just assume this is a man asking this question, or it could be the other way. It could be a woman who's struggling and she wants to be accountable with her husband. But in many ways, this is going to depend on your spouse and how much they're willing to be involved in your purity journey. It is extremely helpful to have a spouse who is willing to do whatever they can to jump in. And I'll let Steph share more thoughts on this, but just a couple of things. First off, there is a view that your spouse should be your number one accountability partner. And this isn't just me saying this. I have spoken with other counselors and pastors, and it is evident that though your wife needs to be a part of it, your spouse needs to be a part of it. They shouldn't be secluded from this very important journey in your life. The picture given in Ecclesiastes chapter 4 of an accountability partner, this threefold cord that is not quickly broken, is a picture of discipleship. It's not a picture of marriage. And one obvious way is because it says a threefold cord, and there's not three people in a marriage, I hope. So that it cannot be what this is referring to. But the average wife just cannot handle daily accountability, like what a guy needs. And in that accountability, the level of communicating everything that he needs to communicate, it would just eat at her so much with every thought, every second glance, or every consideration. Those are the level of the things we need to communicate to an accountability partner, even just the consideration. And that is just going to eat up a wife. And she doesn't want to be the cop. She doesn't want to have to police you like an accountability partner may need to dig in at times and figure out root issues and things. And that just, it can actually hinder a love relationship within a couple if a wife feels like she needs to be policing her husband. So yes, there needs to be accountability within marriage, but a big part of the accountability is just her knowing that there is daily accountability going on with another group. So I think a conversation every couple needs to have in this area is a discussion where the husband is asking, when do you want to know? At what degree? Is it at consideration? Is it at setting myself up for failure, not being wise? Is it at a second glance? Is it at falling to temptation that it was presented, it came to me in some way? I wasn't looking for it, but it popped up and I fell that way. Or is it when I'm searching for it and then I need to tell you? So when you decide that with your wife, and it really, she does need to, because you're building trust with her, you can't stipulate what that is. Giving recommendations, talking it through, working it through mutually is great, but really she needs to decide where that line falls when she wants to know. And when she says that, that's what the rule is. That's because you're building trust, you are the offender, and she stipulates what this is going to look like to build up her trust. But what needs to happen is she will state, I want to know when it gets to this degree, but that's assuming that you're communicating everything else to your accountability partner or partners, to your group. That's why we've set up in the cord what's called a support contact. And what that means is I have my wife as a support contact. If I don't check in a day, then she gets an email saying that I didn't. And that is a trust building tool so that she knows that I'm being consistent and keeping my side of the bargain, as it were. So, Steph, I don't know if you have more thoughts on that, but as far as a tool, I think the Court app is set up that way. So it's not just designed to be a group with a husband and wife, but it doesn't totally exclude that relationship either, and putting them as a support contact. So they're still clued in and a part of the journey.
Mm-hmm. Well, how you laid that out was very good. And I think one big factor for a wife, too, is just knowing that the husband is being honest and building that trust. And I know whenever we've talked about different things, I know you will truthfully and honestly answer any question I have and give me any information I want. And there's no feeling of that you're trying to hold back or make it sound better than it is. So just having that 100% transparency and honesty, just knowing that you know everything if you need to, and nothing's being hidden.
Yeah, there's no question that won't be answered. Well, there's more we could say on that, but I think we've covered several different angles of that. I think the big thing is just understanding that the accountability within the marriage is not everything, but it's not nothing either. So it needs to exist. In fact, a survey was done on married men that have been in a place of sustained victory, as to what was the most helpful tool or thing for them to get to that point. And the number one thing that was given was a supportive wife, one that was willing to be a part of that journey. So obviously, not everyone has that listening to this podcast, but because the question came from that perspective, that is very important and crucial to have that. And a wife needs to be willing to be a part of her husband's journey. If it's the other way around, a husband needs to be willing to be a part of his wife's journey in that way. But it's not everything either. So understand that there really needs to be another party involved, or another group, a cord involved, that is really where the bulk of the accountability happens. Communication always happens. There's no limit on that within the marriage. But the accountability, the discipleship side of it, needs to be with another party involved. Well, I think you said that was the last question.
Yeah, there's a few others, but I think we basically covered them within the other ones. So.
Okay, all right. We covered our bases. So until next year, that's the Q&A. We're going to start the following series on the thought life when we come back in January. So looking forward to that. Hope you all have a good Christmas. And as many listening to this are students, this can be a difficult time because you're getting back home where there could be triggers. It's easy to isolate now that college students, you're not around your roommate all the time anymore. And so it's easy to isolate because of that. You have a lot more time on your hands because of Christmas break. This is a very dangerous position to be in. So be sure not to be idle in any way you can help it. Get a plan for your Christmas break. Have goals set, daily things you want to accomplish. Stay accountable. If you're not in accord, now is the time to start because of the dangers that could come from the seclusion and isolation that can happen when you have more time on your hands. So if you're not on the Cord app, jump on now, start a group, and this would be an excellent time to start. And just be intentional with your time over Christmas break. This does not need to be a time of relapse or step backwards at all, but communicate, be accountable, be wise in your use of time. And there's no reason why this time couldn't be a time of growing closer to the Lord and doing what's right and continuing in our journey to be less gratified and more satisfied with Jesus Christ. Have a Merry Christmas. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Generation Podcast. If you've been blessed or helped in any way by this episode or any other episodes, please consider sharing what God has done in your life. Your testimony could be exactly what someone else needs to take their own step out of the boat. To share your testimony, please visit thegeneration.org/testimony.